Welcome to That Worldview podcast. I'm your host, David Purdy, where we discuss and try to understand the truth of reality in a world of confusion. P.S. Bring your brains. Well, welcome to That Worldview podcast, the very first episode. It is definitely a lot harder to start a podcast than I realized, but here we are. Thankfully, we're at the first one. During this episode, we'll be talking about why this podcast, why the name, a little bit about who I am, and what the future will look like. The name, That Worldview. The reason I picked the name was because everybody has a worldview. The most dangerous worldview is one that's just given to you and not thought through at all. The safest worldview is one that you've thought through and you're humble and honest about, and that you're honest with reality about. And I'm a Christian, and I believe that as I've studied, I've found that the Christian worldview is the best worldview. Not because, quite frankly, there is, I would say, bias toward it, but I know it to be true because I've seen it to work the best, and I know it's real. I found it to be true in my life. Whether you agree or not, I guess that's up to you. A really good quote by C.S. Lewis says, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." And I found that to be extremely true with Christianity. You have to have a basis of truth, of knowing that something can be actually true before the world will really make sense. And you have principles to go by to understand if things are true. Logic is the basis. Without logic, we wouldn't know if anything's true or false just because we had no reasoning basis to start from. But I would just urge everybody to move forward in humility about what is true in the world. And you got to start at that premise that there is something true in the world. And that is the whole point of that worldview. God has a worldview, and I believe that worldview is perfect. So we are all here to understand and try to figure out what that worldview is. We're here to glean from the Lord, understand, talk about things, and hopefully come to some conclusions, and also come to more questions that we'll have to think through. And as we grow on this path of understanding and having a correct worldview, I believe it'll inherently bring us closer to Christ if you're a Christian. If you're not, hopefully it'll bring you to salvation. That's obviously, I would say, the first step. So that's why the name, That Worldview. The second thing is, who am I? My name is David Purdy. I'm 28 years old. I really became a follower of Christ at around 20 or 21. I grew up in a Christian home my whole life, but it didn't become real to me until I was about 20 or 21. And the past 8 years, I've just been studying the Bible, studying economics, studying philosophy, studying a lot of stuff. And all of it has been self-taught, which can be a good, bad thing, I guess. But I really enjoy it. And I have very good parents, and I believe they definitely raised me to learn to know how to think logically. And so I would say I can hold my own pretty much in any conversation. And, but we'll be going through it together. And my worldview definitely isn't perfect. There's a lot of error, a lot of things I'm still learning. But this is the beginning of we got to have those conversations somehow. My journey is to just continue learning, to continue growing in the podcast, and just understanding what God says about the world and understanding how the world moves accordingly, which would give us a better roadmap into moving in the world. The third part is what the future of this podcast will look like. We'll be doing interviews with people that have been very helpful in my life. We'll be talking a lot about missions, theology, politics, everything under the sun. And as it goes on, I will be doing interviews with people. I'm going to really love it. The second thing is we'll just be doing topical conversations, and really they can go pretty much anywhere. We'll be talking about theology, again, like I said earlier, politics, current events, listener interest, and biblical missions. So those are definitely, I think, the top things we'll be talking about. If you want to listen to something, put it in the comments. I'll look at it and do some study on it, and we'll talk about it. I think talking about what people need to hear, what they're interested in, is a very, very vital thing. And then we'll also be doing book reviews. I've listened. I do a lot of Audible. I don't have time to read as many books as I've gone through. I wish I had that kind of time. But I've listened to a lot of books and read a lot of books about a lot of stuff. And so as time goes on, I'll probably be picking a book every week and just doing a book review on it. What I think about the author, what I think about the book, how things are going, cons and pros, obviously, to the book, stuff like that. And I think it'll also be good for listeners. So if they want to study more on a particular topic, they'll have a good rough idea of what that book's about and, whether or not it's a book for them to read. So those are I would say the main points for this podcast. And I'm really looking forward to what the Lord has in store for it all. I think one of the things that we'll be doing a lot of is obviously theology and biblical missions, but I think all of those things will bleed into everything else. There's definitely a lot of bleeding from one subject to another when it comes to understanding something holistically. There's not just one factor that contributes to one whole result. That's definitely, I would say, true. So this podcast obviously is going to be very short. It's just the introduction episode to the podcast. And I really hope that you guys stick around, subscribe, listen to the podcast, do the little notification on whatever platform you're listening on. Right now it's just audio, but I would love to do a video podcast once I get a good camera and just keep going from there. And I'm just here to grow and to help others grow as well. So God bless you guys and welcome to the show.